In today's video, I'm ranking every single book I read in 2024. Let's get right into it. Okay friends, I am so excited to share this video with you today because I actually have a substantial list of books to share. I feel like the last time I did a video like this, I had maybe 5 or less books on the list for the entire year, but I have 18 with a bonus book, so I have 19 books to share with you in today's video, and I'm really happy with that number. I'm really proud of myself. This is the most I've read in my entire adult life, which I'm really proud of, so I'm just really excited to jump into this. The way that I'm going to do this ranking is that I will start from the bottom and work my way up, so I'll talk about my least favorite books and move onwards to my most favorite book of 2024. And like I said, I have a bonus book and I will talk a little bit about that because I technically didn't finish it this year, and you probably know which book I'm talking about. But anyway, let's jump into it because this is a lot and I don't want this video to be 5 hours long. So the last book, or my least favorite book of 2024, is Don't Look in the Trees. Now, if I read it on my Kindle, you'll see it on the screen, but otherwise I have a physical copy to show you. This one I read on my Kindle. It was a negative 100 out of 10. It was a novella. Technically, it was just 70 something pages, and it was supernatural alien invasion type of vibes. That's what the story was about, and you follow a small group of people in the middle of nowhere that's kind of dealing with this situation. It felt really flat. The story made no sense in many parts. I think some of the characters' names were messed up during dialogue. It was just very messy and I could not get into it. Very cheesy. I know it's really short, so you could definitely give it a try, but I would say don't even waste your time reading the 70 pages. Okay, next is What Moves the Dead, and I know I'm gonna get some negative comments about this one because it is well loved. It has really rave reviews, and I know it's part of a really well loved series as well. It's a retelling of The Fall of the House of Usher, and it's a really unique retelling, I will say that. And I thought there were some scenes, some moments in this short story that were really spooky, scary, and they stuck with me. They still stick with me. However, I don't know if it was the mood that I was in. I was reading it just as we were getting into October, or maybe I don't know. The pacing of it never really kept me super engaged, and it's such a short book. I really thought that I would be engaged from beginning to end, and I don't know, I didn't really feel compelled to keep reading it, but I did finish it because I wanted to finish it. Maybe it was also the expectations based off of all of the rave reviews that I've heard, so I don't know. Okay, the next book is this book. This is another one that got really hyped up, especially on TikTok, on booktok, and it really fell flat for me. I know there's a visual adaptation. I know a movie just came out with Amy Adams, and I've heard there are mixed reviews for that movie as well, and it kind of goes back to the book being mixed, so maybe it's just a problematic thing throughout, but I had high expectations thinking that this was going to be pretty spooky, pretty bizarre and weird, and it is definitely weird. It's about a woman that thinks she's turning into a dog, but the underlying theme of the entire story is motherhood. It's definitely this woman who is a stay-at-home mom, a new stay-at-home mom, and she's trying to navigate motherhood. And unfortunately, from the very beginning, I kind of knew where this was going, which is crazy to say because you would think you wouldn't know what a story is gonna go to in terms of direction when you're talking about a woman who thinks she's turning into a dog, but somehow I got it pieced together while I was reading it, and so it was just a real letdown. The feminist part of it was a real letdown. I feel like it wasn't nuanced enough. I don't know, it just got a lot of hype, and then once again, I got really let down. Okay, the next one is Midnight on Beacon Street. I'm surprised that this one ends up so low on my list, but I did have some really stellar books that I read this year, so that's probably why. But I found this in my local bookstore. It is a slasher, and it is set in suburban New Jersey. So all of that screamed me, I needed to pick it up, and it's a short story or a short book, so I needed to pick it up. It was fun. It was really good. It was definitely slasher-esque. It had a lot of slasher tropes in it, which is really fun if you're a fellow horror lover as myself. However, I think most of the time when you're reading this is spent building the character, the main character, and a whole school of characters when there wasn't enough slasher stuff. I feel like there could have been more of a balance, there could have been more spooky scary, but instead we are spent learning about a lot of characters and not really getting the time to get scared, get spooked out, or think about who is the killer, who could be doing what, things like that. So maybe it actually needed some more pages. That's probably the first you'll ever hear me say that. Or maybe it just needed less character development, or just less characters, period. Okay, the next book is Summer Rental. I read this right at the perfect time. It was literally hurricane season, and this book takes place in Miami during hurricane season in the midst of a really, really bad hurricane. And this one was a lot of fun. It's also a slasher, and it was very teenage slasher. So I will say it was corny, it was cheesy, because the teenage dialogue was a bit too much for me. It was a bit too corny for me. And I will also say that there were some lines, some phrases that were completely ripped off from the movie Scream. And you all know that I love Scream. That's my favorite movie. I watch it like 100 times a year. You can probably see art of it in my background. And I love when you pay homage to Scream. My podcast is literally called Live or Alone. But they truly ripped off phrases and lines from Scream in this book, which really took me out of the experience of the story itself. It made it a little less unique. And that's unfortunately, because aside from that, I think it was a really fun time. There was definitely a mystery. There was a lot of slasher type of stuff going on, but there was also the psychological piece. And of course, there was a lot of chaos because it was a summer rental house full of teenagers. So it was fun. I do recommend, but just a heads up on the cheesy stuff. Okay, the next book is probably it definitely is the only romance on my list. I'm not a romance reader. It is People We Meet on Vacation. And I got into this book because I wanted to try a romance out this year. I really, really wanted to give romance a try. And I know Emily Henry is a queen of romance right now. And I've heard that she's a really good person to check out if you are just getting into romance and you're not really well versed with romance tropes, or you're not comfy with all of the cheesy romance stuff. And I'm definitely not a fan of cheesy, so I didn't want to read something like that. So I picked up People We Meet on Vacation, and I know that's probably one of the least favorite books of Emily Henry fans, but I really liked it. I thought it was pretty fun. It was definitely a good, timely read, me reading it while I was on vacation. And yeah, it was fun. It wasn't too cheesy. I thought it was a really good, solid romance. It's about two people who met in college, and they were complete opposites, but they ended up being best friends, and they would always take a trip with each other every single year, and things happen. Okay, the next book I found at a bookstore where there was a table that said Korean thrillers or crime, and I thought that was so cool to have a table very specific to that very specific subgenre. And this one definitely stood out because it's small, it's short, and it's so bright. But the synopsis is essentially like a murder mystery. You're following the story of, I think, 3 characters or so, and the impact of this murder on their lives from before, during, and after. And it's so interesting. It's very simple. I will say that I knew who the killer was from the very beginning, but I think what's most important about this story is the rawness of human emotions and life, and how one event can impact you forever and ever. So it really has some fantastic life lessons in it, even though the story, like the mystery itself, is really predictable. And I know this is going to be weird to say, but at the end, there is a bit of life lessons, like wrapping up life lessons, and it kind of coincides with slow living. I know that's weird, but if you do pick up this book, let me know if you agree with that sentiment. But I really like this one. I'm also surprised it's kind of low on my list. Okay, the next book is almost smack dab in the middle, but it is Coraline. I read this right as we were getting into October because I wanted something spooky but also kind of cozy to read. And I've never read Coraline. I've never picked it up before, but I did see the movie. So I knew what I was getting into, and I knew it was going to be good. And it makes it into the middle slot of my list because I really liked it. It was so much fun. The writing is fantastic. It is a kid's book, but it is so well written for a kid's book. Like, an adult can read it and thoroughly enjoy it, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. Now, I didn't absolutely love it. It didn't blow me away, mostly because I'm not a kid, so like that extra spark, that extra bit of magic and spectacular element of the story is just not hitting the same in the same way a kid would read it. So I feel like if I was a kid, I would definitely be like, oh my gosh, my mind is blown. But because I'm not, I wasn't like completely swept away by this story, but it was still a really fantastic story, and I do recommend if you've never read it before. Okay, the next book was a recommendation by a very close friend of mine, so I knew it was going to be good. It is Slade House. This is a short story. I think it's not a novella. It's like almost 200 pages, yeah, but it's a real genre bending story. So it takes place in different time periods and different decades, but it all sort of centers around one location, an alleyway in some remote area. And weird things happen in this alleyway and this house. And there's an interconnection there between the decades and this one location. There's science fiction elements, there's horror elements, there's thriller elements, true crime elements, or not true crime, just crime elements. But it's so cool to see all of those different genres fused together in a way that actually works. I'm not really a big science fiction person, so I almost thought that I wasn't gonna like this when they started getting into the science fiction lore stuff, which I won't give too much away, but there's that type of stuff. I thought I wasn't gonna like that, but I really, really did like it because they were able to effectively balance that with the spooky horror stuff, which I prefer. So it was really fun, entertaining from beginning to end, and even though it was less than 200 pages, I really had a strong connection with all of the characters in this short story. And you know, you're going through decade to decade, so you're only spending a few chapters with these people, but because they're all interconnected, you build a relationship as you continue to read. So I thought that was really cool. Okay, the next book is Swiped. I read this, I think, in the spring, almost summertime. It was a really fun read. This one is also like I think I would say like a murder mystery slash slasher. It follows a person who is like obsessed with dating on dating apps or a dating app, and every single first date that she's been on in the recent time, they end up dying one by one. And she's trying to figure out the mystery because obviously they're all interconnected, and there is certainly a mystery that is interconnected with her. So you're kind of racing to the end of the story along with the main character, which is so much fun. There's so many slasher scream type of elements in it, and I just thought that that was so entertaining. The main character was entertaining, funny. Even though she was kind of annoying at times, it was also just really, really fun, entertaining. It was one that I really wanted to tell other people about because I was like, can you believe this happened? So it's very entertaining. Definitely a good book club read as well. Okay, the next book I read or listened to on audio, and I highly recommend you do so because it is I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette McCurdy, and Jeanette McCurdy reads the audiobook. And it's about her life. It's about her tumultuous relationship with her mother and becoming famous. She is known for being Sam on iCarly. And so there's just so much going on. It's a heavy, heavy story, but the way that Jeanette McCurdy narrates it is so powerful because it's obviously so close and near and dear to her heart that like it's really moving, and it actually resonates, unfortunately, in ways, even though it's like a really heavy, unfortunate story. But it's also really insightful, and you learn a lot of things, and I've grown to have so much respect for Jeanette because of this story. So definitely recommend. I know a lot of people love this story, and if you are going to check it out, I highly, highly recommend you do so on audio. Okay, the next book is 19 Claws and a Blackbird. This is a collection, so there's 19 short stories in here. This author is known for this book, Tender is the Flesh. I have not read Tender is the Flesh, but I really want to now because after reading these 19 short stories, my mind is blown. Their writing is fantastic. So strong, so sharp, so disturbing. There are stories in here that I will never forget. I can remember almost word by word what happened because they were so wild. And it was also a book where I wanted to immediately tell someone about it because I'm like, I cannot believe what I just read. I need to tell you about it. It was shocking. And I love books like that. I love a good lit fic book that is also very disturbing, eerie, errs on the side of horror, and it's not necessarily horror, but it is disturbing lit fic. So if you're into any of that stuff, you're definitely going to like this author, and I have to pick up Tender is the Flesh because this impressed me. Okay, the next book is Glossy. I think I also listened to this on audiobook, which was really helpful because I'm not a major nonfiction reader. This story is about the life of Emily Weiss, and she's the creator of Glossier. I'm a big fan of Glossier. You all probably know that. And it's nonfiction, obviously. So I thought it was good to read it on audiobook because it feels like a podcast almost, and that helped me really get through it really quickly. So if you have trouble getting through nonfiction books, I do recommend also trying out audiobook, and it gives it the podcast vibe. But I really, really liked this because one, I learned a lot about Glossier. I am not only a fan of their products, but I'm also a fan of their marketing tactics. If you didn't know, I am a marketer, so I love learning about really successful, marketing campaigns and stuff like that. And they are one that I really, really idolize, look up to, take inspiration from. So I thought that was super interesting. But it was also really interesting to hear about Emily and who she is as a person. Now I will say the author really paints Emily as someone who's far more negative than I think she actually is. I think she's more so just a private person, but the author kind of paints her in a way where like that could be a bad thing. I don't know. But that's just the vibe that I got. So mixed feelings about the way that it was written, but it was still very interesting and I really, really liked it. Okay, the next book. Oh my God. We are getting to like the top 5. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, this is the 5th one. So, oh gosh, The Guest by Emma Cline. I know Emma Cline is really well known. She's really well loved, but this is the only book I've ever read and the first book that I've ever read by Emma Cline. This book is dreadful, but in the best way. The writing is incredible. It's so sharp. It's so disturbing. A lot like this book. It's very, very sharp. And I love that. I love lit fic that is disturbing and weird and kind of creeps under your skin in the way that horror does, but it's not necessarily horror. This book does that. I felt dread from the moment I picked it up all the way to the very end, and then it just ends, and I was filled with dread. It follows a girl who was living in the Hamptons with her partner, and then they parted ways, and she tried to weasel herself into staying in the Hamptons for a period of time before Labor Day, because she didn't want to go back home to New York City for certain reasons. It's so disturbing. The main character is miserable, dreadful, horrible, problematic. It's so bad, but it's also so addicting. You just want to know what's going on because this story only takes place in the matter of, I think, 5 days. And so, like, it's just 5 days worth of what's going on. You need to know what happens after the 5 days. While you're reading it, you just need to know what is going on. So extremely addicting, extremely fantastic, well written, absolutely love. I do recommend. This is also an extra copy, so if you want this copy, I already have it on my Kindle. I made a mistake and I bought this. So if you do want a copy of this, let me know in the comments and I can send it your way. I guess the first person who claims it, I will send it your way. Okay, number 4 on my list is Incidents Around the House. I read this in October, just as we were approaching Halloween. And it was the perfect time to do that because it was one of the best horror specific books that I've read in a really long time. It's really hard for me to read a horror book and get the same vibes feeling as when I'm watching a horror movie, and this one does it really well. I have a feeling that this one's going to turn into a movie eventually because it reads like a movie almost. It reads like a haunted house, supernatural possession type of horror movie. And so you're essentially following the perspective of a child. So this is written in the perspective of a child the entire time. And this child was friends with something in her closet. And things happen. Obviously, like things are gonna happen and bad things, very, very bad things happen. She also has a problematic family. There are problematic adults around her, like choices are being made on her behalf because she's a child, and she's being affected by this all at the same time as trying to battle this thing that she thought was a friend that was living in her closet. So spooky because it's written in the perspective of a child. Certain descriptions are very, very disturbing and will stick in my head forever. And again, it creeped me out like a horror movie would creep me out. So I imagine a visual of this being fantastic. Okay, number 3 on my list is the last book in the trilogy, the Angel Lake trilogy by Stephen Graham Jones. I don't have the slip on it. I don't like the slips, but That's what this is. It is The Angel of Indian Lake. Again, it's the last one in the series, and why the third one is my favorite and why it ends up on this list is, one, I read the other ones years ago, so it wouldn't even apply, but also this is my favorite of the entire series because you follow one character, Jade, and in the first book, she's an adolescent, like she's a teenager, and then you kind of follow her life as the books go on, as she gets into adulthood. And it's kind of centered around her, but it's also centered around her hometown, which is a small town, I think in the middle of Oregon, I think. And it is rapidly getting gentrified, and crazy things are happening in terms of that, but also a lot of bloodshed, a lot of slasher stuff, a lot of lore, a lot of something weird is going on. There's like a lot of tall tales happening around the town, but they're actually real, and it sets off a series of events that is just bloody, slasher-esque, actual like real life killers, but then like supernatural killers. There's everything you could possibly think of in this series, and the third one is really cool because it wraps everything up, and it's the bloodiest one of all, I think, and you learn a lot about Jade in a way that is really mature and nuanced. And of course, you know, starting off with Jade, she's just really angsty. She's an angsty teenager, but she builds so much in the last book that I've grown to love her so much because of the last book. If you've never read Stephen Graham Jones before, I highly recommend you do because he is one of my favorite authors ever. He is a lover. He is a true lover of horror. And you can see it in these books because every single page, every single sentence is laden with horror tropes, horror references. And if you're a horror lover, you're going to appreciate every single bit of it. You're going to want to sit down and absorb every bit of it. Can't say enough good things, but let's move on to my number 2 pick, which I did not expect to be my number 2 pick. I picked this up in the middle of a bookstore for no reason at all other than I heard it was good, and it is also signed. I was like, you know what? I heard it was good. It's signed. I might as well just pick it up. So that's what I did. This is Chlorine by Jade Song. This follows a young woman who, it starts early on in her childhood, like when she's very little, elementary school, and she's just getting into school and she's joining like the swim team. And it really follows her path of trying to be like one of the best swimmers, Olympic level type of best swimmers in her town. And it is disturbing because, like Night Bitch, where the main character thinks that she's turning into a dog, this main character thinks she's turning into a mermaid, or she is a mermaid. And that sounds disturbing and bizarre and weird, and what I didn't get in Night Bitch is what I get in here. I get so much spooky, disturbing, bizarre, it unsettled me, uncomfortable type of feelings in this. But you're also getting a lot of nuance with the character. Societal things are talked about, parental things like toxic parents or problematic parents or immigrant parents. There's just a lot of societal type of stuff happening in here. So it's a really loaded story, which makes it super nuanced and interesting and good and problematic in ways that are actually just quite relatable. And it also has the story of her thinking that she's a mermaid. So it's extremely bizarre. And it started off slow, so I didn't know if I was going to end up liking this, but as it built, I was like, wow, this is building up to be something incredible. And the grand finale really is one of the best grand finales I've read in a literary fiction book. It was absolutely like a standing ovation, crazy, oh my god, jaw on the floor, fantastic ending. At least for me, I really loved it. And it was a great, disturbing end to a book that I was hoping it would be disturbing. Okay, so this is my last book. I cannot believe I'm saying that my number 1 book of 2024 is a nonfiction book, but here we are. The Art Thief. I talked about this book a lot earlier in the year. This was one of the first books that I read this year, actually, and it's still my favorite book of 2024. This is a nonfiction book of 2 art thieves. They stole over 200 pieces, or they've had 200 heists during their career, let's say, and it's nonfiction, but this reads like fiction. It reads like a thriller, and it's so cool to see a nonfiction story be written in that type of way. I think this author is fantastic at doing that. It just reeled me in from the very beginning, and it just got crazier and crazier, believe it or not, all the way through the end. And you would think that that's like something made up, but it's true. Like, it just really in real life got crazier and crazier as things progressed, as things escalated, and I was just hooked. The ending is the worst slash best part, the best part as in like the most shocking part, jaw on the floor shocking part, so it was most interesting for me to read, but it was the worst because this is a true story of thieves, of criminals, and it gets worse. It gets worse and worse and worse. And after I finished reading this, I was addicted, obsessed. I wanted to know anything about these art thieves, but there's actually not that much on the internet, which I think adds to the element of mystery and intrigue. But yeah, this is, if you read one book on this list, please read this one. I know it might be like, I don't know if I want to read a nonfiction about like art thieves. That sounds so random and niche. I promise you, if you like anything thrilling, it reads like a thriller movie. And I've honestly seen a thriller movie very similar to this. So I'll just say that. I also recommended it to a friend who's not into art at all, or like not really into art as much as I am. And she absolutely loved it. She read it in a day. So please, please, please read this one. And then I'm going to end this off by just quickly, briefly mentioning my bonus book, which is The Goldfinch. Have not finished it. I have like just over 200 pages left of this book, and it's so good. It is so well written, but it's 800 pages, 800 plus pages, and it is dreadful. It is one of the most miserable books I've ever read. Very similar to The Guest. It's miserable, it's dreadful. You just can't stand what's going on. You just can't stand the characters, and you're just filled with discomfort and dread. But the writing is so good and so addicting, and the story is so good and addicting that you need to know what happens. And that's where I'm at with this. So while it's taking me 5 million years, in reality it's taking me well over a year to finish this. I'm going to finish it because I need to know what happens, and I need to just say that I finished this because it will be quite an accomplishment to say that I finished this finally, and I know a lot of people love The Goldfinch, so I trust that it's going to end off really well and I'm going to really absolutely love it, but I'll tell you more about that probably next year. But that is all for this video. I know that was really lengthy. I apologize, but it was really hard to get through 19 books in a short time frame. So I hope you were able to put me in the background and hear about these books. Again, I will, if there's one that you need to check out, it is The Art Thief, but I will link all of the books that I talked about today down below in like a bookshop.org link so that you can see them all in one place. And thank you. Just thank you so much for being here. Thank you for nerding out about books with me, and I will talk to you in next week's video.